as a beginning sort of 30,000-foot view or survey of this issue and the perennial importance of the church's view on family, on marriage, on sexuality, there's a couple, well, there's just one, actually, maybe you saw this. The Institute for Family Studies came out with a recent study, and they pointed to three things. So why, and this is a big perennial question, right? Why do people stay religious? Particularly, this was studying why do Christians, why do Catholics, why do they stay Catholic? And again, there might be a variety of reasons that we point out. Well, like if we're praying at home regularly, if they're going to a Catholic school, if we're praying the rosary, if we never miss Mass, things like that. These are important. But listen to what this says. I mean, they're essential, I should say. Right? They're essential, particularly Mass. But listen to what this says. In terms of what really moves the needle in the life of a child coming of age, whether or not they're going to practice their faith. First, you maybe heard me reference this before, from Christian Smith, a great and eminent sociologist, Catholic sociologist at Notre Dame. He calls it spiritual conversations. Are we having, outside of prayer, outside of Mass, outside of class, spiritual conversations? Are we talking about Jesus Christ? Are we talking about God? Are we talking about prayer? It's just sort of a normal, this is an ordinary thing that every Christian should be doing type thing. So spiritual conversations, that's thing number one. Free-flowing, hey, how's prayer? The kid's probably going to be like, anything like me, good. Let's talk about something else. But spiritual conversations, so lean into that. This is really important. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. Thing number two, a tribal view of the family. There's fundamentally three views that we can have of the family, or of people. One of individualism, it's just me, I'm my own person, I'm in charge. It comes down to me and what I want. Then there's what we might call the nuclear family, husband, wife, family. This is kind of what comes to mind for us Americans, doesn't it? This is mom and dad and the kids, and I think most Christians are just pretty comfortable with that being like, yeah, we need to be a good nuclear family. Here's the thing, here's what they really press into. That's not the traditional Judeo-Christian conception of family, is it? Because the third and highest form, lived out experience of family, is a tribal sense, where it's a generational overlap. We have grandparents, aunts, uncles involved with the parents and the grandkids, the nieces and the nephews. It's this sort of network of family culture, which in America, chasing careers sometimes more than strong community, gets left behind. Who knows somebody, relative, great people who live nowhere near you? And this isn't to point the finger at anybody. It's just the way that America is. The world is. It's like, well, I think I'm just going to move. And then grandparents are kind of a little bit left in the lurch. Like, well, I get to see them every Thanksgiving and Christmas at least. That's totally novel. That's the last 15 minutes of the world and society in terms of history. And so I'm guessing that, well, regardless of whether Jacqueline talks about that tonight, keep that in mind in terms of fundamentally the conception of the family is not nuclear. It's tribal. And maybe you're thinking, well, I don't really want my parents near my kids. Not saying that's true for anybody here. Or aunts or uncles. I don't know if they're an influence that I want. Okay, but find a network, a community, a web where this culture is being cultivated. Spiritual conversations are at the heart of life. Thing number three, faithful two-parent homes with the father as a strong spiritual leader. This moves the needle the biggest. If you have a two-parent home, if the father is strong in his faith, regardless of the practice of the mother, and this isn't for a second suggesting that the mother has a small influence on the formation of the children spiritually, obviously not. But in terms of practice of the children, the father moves the needle 40%. If he's bought in, if he's sold out, 40% swing. Nothing else comes close to the involvement and leadership and initiative of the father in co-op with the wife. So, to uncork this topic a bit more, I want to invite up our actual speaker for today, Jacqueline Van Hemert. So she's a stay-at-home mom, meaning that she has the hardest, biggest, toughest, most powerful job in the world. stay-at-home mom who isn't great at the staying-home part. Before taking on the roles of a playdate planner and a full-time domestic administrator, doesn't all that sound more professional that way, right? She spent 5 years as the Director of Evangelization and Faith Formation at St. Mary's and St. Raymond's parishes in Altoona and Fall Creek. After the kids go to bed, she's a grad student pursuing a master's degree in business administration, a special project writer for Franciscan at Home Catechetical Institute, and the founder of Magdala Grove, a prayer apostolate that strengthens Catholic priests and leaders through the daily sacrifices of women and mothers, especially the stay-at-home kind. Jacqueline lives in a tiny but cute, make sure we have the script right here, tiny but cute, Cape Cod-style home in Eau Claire with her husband Michael and her 2 little kids, Mia and Leo. Everybody, please welcome up Mrs. Jacqueline Van Heemer.
Thank you. How's the volume on this? Are we too loud, too quiet? I'm a very loud person by nature, so we can turn it down if we need to. We good? Yeah? Okay, cool, thanks. John, I have a joke. It's for my daughter. Why can't you give Elsa a balloon?
I'm bad at why.
Because she'll let it go.
Oh my God.
My kids have finally gotten the concept of jokes. It's really cute now. Leo doesn't really understand like the punchline concept, but he understands the concept of the jokes. He'll be like, ha 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 ha. Mia's getting the joke. She's 5. She's getting the concept of jokes, which is good. My name is Jacqueline Van Heemer. It's great to be with you today. I'm the first lady of the lineup, which I'm so excited about that. We've had some fantastic speakers, and I am honored to be asked to be part of that group. Okay, we'll start. If I can get my slide to go. There we go. This is me when I was a baby. I was a very cute little baby. I'm the firstborn of 5 kids. I grew up in Milwaukee. I have 3 brothers and 1 sister. My mom actually came tonight just to see my talk. She drove all the way up from Milwaukee to see my talk. She's like my best groupie. But she's gonna stay a couple days for the day. So that is how I began in this life. And then I got a little bit older. I am a very stereotypical firstborn child. I'm very incentivized by things like star charts. This is the star chart for some sort of chores or whatever I had to do to get a new bike. So we have like a nice VHS video of me going to pick up the bike at Toys R Us. I'm very proud about that. My daughter Mia takes after me in many ways. So she's also very incentivized by the star charts. That hasn't really gone away. Then, okay, so I was homeschooled my whole life. And then after I graduated high school, I went to college in Milwaukee. And then after college, I moved out to State College, Pennsylvania, and I worked with a Protestant chastity ministry. I was traveling around the country, and I was giving events and talks for moms and their 8 to 12-year-old daughters. So they're tween girls. It was very loud. It was very pink. Is that me, John?
Oh. That's me. My bad. I don't know how that happened. How embarrassing.
I was like, how is my hair? Like,
we should probably get another MC.
You're good. You did great. Nice job. But I worked with the ministry where we would go around, we would build these giant balloon structures, and we would talk with girls about things like, about the lies we believe about ourselves. We would talk about relationship between mom and daughter. We would talk about kind of setting the stage for building on the topic of sex and family later on. Although with that age group, we didn't get into that. So I often wore a lot of sparkles and a lot of colors, and I sang and I danced, and it was fantastic. It was like my dream job. And then after that, I moved down to Nashville for a little bit, and then in between all of that is when I met my husband, Michael. We actually met right before I went to college at a Protestant church evangelism training. So he brought his youth group, and I was there as one of the teachers, and we met, and we went out evangelizing together, and he was very attractive when he did that. There was a woman who was arguing with me about something, and I didn't know how to answer it, and he's like, can I say something? I was like, sure, please go ahead. And he just starts talking with her, and then she's like nodding. She's like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, oh, I was like, wow, that was really sexy. Like, and that is how the romance of Michael and Jacqueline Van Hamer began. It was a lot of on again, off again, from that point on. You heard him last month if you were here. He did a fantastic job. And then somewhere in there, it was a very long journey, but my husband, Michael, and I both, we came into the Catholic Church in 2015, in large part for me, because of some of the topics related to tonight's teaching on theology of the body, on marriage, sex, and the family. For whatever reason, that is something that has always been a hot button topic for me. I've always been interested in that. I don't know why, just something that is a burning fire in my heart. And so when we were learning about the church's teachings on this topic, there were a lot that I found made sense. They were the fulfillment of everything I had already learned, but all the missing pieces were filled in. And there were also many that I had a really hard time with, that I really struggled with, and had to work through before we came into the church. But we did in April 2015, we came into the church together, and then 2 months later, we got married. We got married at Sacred Heart Church in Eau Claire because we thought it was one of the prettiest churches, and that's why we wanted to get married there. We didn't know we had gotten engaged at St. Paul's Cathedral up in St. Paul at the altar of the Sacred Heart, and then we got married at the Church of the Sacred Heart. We got married on the feast day of the Sacred Heart, not by our planning. It just happened to be that day. So people are like, you should pay attention to that. All the Catholics, the good Catholics, they're like God's trying to say something to you in the Sacred Heart's for you. We're like, okay, cool, great. So the Sacred Heart has become sort of part of our family story. Because then when we had little Mia, she was born at Sacred Heart Hospital, which I thought was really appropriate. So I just kind of continued the trend. So we had Mia in 2018. So she's our first, our daughter. A lot like me, very determined, spirited, entrepreneurial, smart young child. And having a daughter who's a lot like you is really fun and also really challenging. It makes it hard. Sometimes you're like, I see why people would have a hard time with me sometimes, because like that piece of me is hard for, but it's healing for me too. It's a good journey to be on. Then, let's see, in the middle of the pandemic, we had little Leo. So in November of 2020, we added a little boy to the family. And oh my goodness, boys are just the sweetest little thing. Like he is so sweet and so tender. Just my little man. I was really nervous about having a son. I didn't know if I was gonna love a boy as much as I loved a girl. And then I had one. I was like, like, you're not my favorite, but like, you're just so sweet. I love you so much. I get the whole like mother-son, father-daughter, because like Michael has a really special relationship with Mia, and I love my relationship with Leo. So that's where we are for now. And then this was our family. We got to go to Disney World, which I know this sounds really silly, but Mia really wanted to go to Disney World. She loves all the princesses. She wanted to go visit the princesses. And we work in ministry. We're like, there is no way. Like, that's not even on the table. But I asked the Lord, I was like, if it is at all possible for us to go to Disney World before she leaves this like magical state of 5-year-old wonder, could you please make it possible? I was like, St. Anthony, you find us a way to go. And I prayed and I asked, and I don't know how all the pieces came together, but somehow we got to go to Disney World, and it was pure magic. Like we cried. It was beautiful. So we got to take them to Disney World. She got to see all the princesses, and it really did remind me of the fact that we have a Father in heaven who loves to shower us with the things that we desire. He loves to give us the desires of our heart. And if you are a parent, if you have a child, I think that there is a catechesis in that for us, that we start to understand what it must be like for God the Father to love his children in the way that he does. Because I couldn't comprehend that until I had kids of my own, where watching them experience joy gives me great joy. It was a really beautiful thing. So that's our little family. This is the topic for today: Christian anthropology, marriage, sex, and family. I get to do the sex talk. I always do the sex talk. Great talk. I'm surprised that the attendance is a little lower tonight, because I feel like this is the talk that everybody should come to. But you guys are lucky that you're here. So, nice job. Way to be here tonight. All right. Okay. This is my family plus my cousin in the front center. But this is us somewhere in the 90s, I think. So that's my sister up at the top, and then my 3 brothers. So cute. I remember my first exposure to anything related to sexuality being the Atom program. This was our computer. Well, it's the version of computer that we had, the Macintosh. It was very exciting to have a computer. And there was this Atom program, which is like an anatomy and physiology program where you could like learn about how the body worked, etc. We were all homeschooled, like I said. And there was this reproductive model where you could access parental controls to turn leaves on or turn leaves off. And my brother and I figured out how to access that. So we turned the leaves off. So that was how we were like, ooh, this is our first exposure to sexuality. It's really exciting. I wanted to get us started with a little bit of a conversation starter. With your tables, if there's enough people at your table. If not, you can join up with another table. Let's just spend a few minutes talking about this question. If you think back to your own family of origin, how, when, and what do you first remember learning about marriage, sex, and family? It might be traumatic and scarring. It could be hilarious. It could be super awkward. Whatever your first memory is, we're gonna open that Pandora's box right now. So spend a couple minutes with your table. You don't have to be graphic or give details, just what do you remember about the first exposure you had to this topic? Go. Take maybe another 20 seconds or so and wrap up our discussion for now.
Is it good? Should we try?
Look at that tech guy. need an MC to replace it.
After I get married, I'm going to stray here.
To this home?
I just love this home. After I'm getting married, I'm going to stray here.
What about the boy you get married to? Where's he gonna go?
He's going to go to a very own home.
Oh, so he's getting
Or
married.
go on a walk. Or just play with his toys. Or just start working on some stuff. He can do anything he wants while I'm at home.
Oh,
Anything he wants. Hey, Mom, how about we go to Mass where I get married?
oh yes. We get married during that sex.
Let's go to the church we pray at, and we all get married at the church we always pray at.
That is a great idea.
I start my first day of getting married. We'll go to the store where there's lots of fancy white dresses, and I'll pick out the dress I most love.
What do you want to marry?
I don't know. Yeah, still has to mail. Never mail.
What kind of things should we be like? What do you want to be like?
I want to have a handsome shirt and handsome pants so I can get married by him. With a bow tie on it.
Both.
And a hat. That's all I want to have. I'll just go for a walk and when I see the perfect boy.
Just go for a walk and when you see the perfect boy.
Yeah. When I see the perfect boy with my new dress on. Look at my dress.
And then that's that.
I'll say, is it great?
What do you think they'll say?
I think I'll say, oh, that is so pretty. What did you do?
That was Mia. That was Mia when she was 3. She was a very verbal 3-year-old child. I don't know what you guys talked about in your discussions. It sounded fun from up here. All of us are exposed to marriage and sex and family in different ways, not just explicitly, not just in the conversations we have, but in the exposures, in what we witness, in the very fact that we are all born into some sort of family. That's our exposure to marriage, sex, and the family. That's our catechesis. In fact, the church talks often about marriage preparation and how the first 18 years of marriage preparation happens before you ever even consider getting married. It happens in your own home as you're witnessing what marriage looks like in that home, what family looks like in that home. That's your first catechesis, is being part of that. This was a completely unprompted discussion. She just started talking. We're eating waffles and sausage for breakfast, and we were just going on for 8.5 minutes. That was the condensed version for 8.5 minutes about the boy she was going to marry by just walking down the street. Just find a boy, get married. I was like, what is your dad going to think about that one? She's like, I don't know. All right, I cannot get this to move forward anymore.
We really need a new text.
I can do the laser pointer though, so that's fun.
After I get married, I'm going to stray here.
That was Leo in the background. He was just adding color commentary. Thanks, Fred.
Yeah, you bet. This is all part of the plan, obviously.
All right. So the Catechism of the Catholic Church tells us that sacred scripture begins with the creation of man and woman in the image and likeness of God. It begins with the marriage. It begins with the wedding. And it concludes with the vision of the wedding feast of the Lamb. I think if you remember Josh's talk and Michael's talk, both of them had touched on the fact that the Bible is a divine comedy, that it ends with a giant wedding where everyone is part of this marriage of the Lamb. This guy right here, does anybody know who this guy is? You guys probably know who this guy is. St. Pope John Paul the Great holding a puppy, and who would not want to be that puppy next to St. Pope John Paul the Great? St. Pope John Paul the Great was the person who gave us what we know as the theology of the body. So it was a series of audiences that was given over several years. Some people like to reduce this to the church's teachings on sex, like this is the sex talk. And that's really insufficient. It's an incomplete understanding of what the theology of the body was. What he was giving us is a true Christian anthropology and a theology of what it means to be a human person. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean that we are this odd composite of body and soul? So he was giving us an understanding of our bodies and a theology of our bodies. And a theology is a study of God. So a theology of our body is how our bodies can teach us about God. So we can learn a lot about God from just looking at our own bodies. So let's actually start with this question. We're not going to do small group discussion for this one. We're going to think about it, and feel free to throw out some things as you come up with them. If the only analogy we had was the natural theology just of us as human people, but particularly in the expression of marriage and sex and family, if that was the only thing we had, if that natural revelation was the only thing we had, what could we infer about who God is and what he is like? Take a minute, just think. And if you're brave enough, shout out some answers, and let's see if we can maybe put together a basic theology based on our own experiences. Relationships.
Love.
Good. Love and relationships. That's a great start, guys. You're smart. Father. Creator. Intimacy. What else? Sacrifice? This table is no longer allowed to answer because they gave you guys all the answers, so we can have some other people come over here throw out some answers. It's a thoughtful question. What can we infer about who God is and what he's like if that's all we had?
The love, like made for love.
Made for love? Mm-hmm. Good. Community of persons. Good. Perpetuation of life. All good. Good. You guys are well catechized. Nice job. St. Pope John Paul the Great said in his apostolic exhortation, Familiaris Consortio, it's the role of the Christian family in the modern world, that this is the very beginning section of it. He said, God created man in his own image and likeness, calling him to existence through love. You guys got that part. He called him at the same time for love. Well done. God is love, and in himself he lives a mystery of personal, loving communion. And I'm going to jump down to that line where it says, love is therefore the fundamental and innate vocation of every human being. I think a lot of times when we hear the phrase God is love, we think of God is loving as an adjective. But that's not what we're told when we see that God is love. We're told that God is living a mystery of personal loving communion. And if you've been here for any of the other talks, we've already touched on how the Trinitarian nature of God as Father and as Son and as Holy Spirit, is that God is three persons, but one God. He is one God, one nature, and that communion of love is what we were made in the image of. So if we tease that out a little bit more, we look at the analogy of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There are a couple of things that we can learn about being made in God's image. And this is setting the stage for our Christian anthropology. What does it mean to be made in the image of God as human persons? First, we are a composite of body and soul. So this is again from the same document. As an incarnate spirit, that is a soul which expresses itself in a body, and a body informed by an immortal spirit. Man is called to love in his unified totality. Love includes the human body, and the body is made a sharer in spiritual love. There's still that Gnostic heresy floating around where the body is bad, where matter is bad, where all of our sin comes from the stuff of this world, and when we die, we go to heaven, we're finally free from our body, it's just our spirit. Heresy. Not true. So, when we die, temporarily body soul separated, but when the resurrection of the body happens, which we say every week at Mass in the Creed, we will have this body, the same body that you are sitting with right now, as much as you love it or you don't, this body in its glorified and perfected form, but this is the body that we will have. So it's really important for us to understand that stuff is not bad, matter is not bad, the body is not bad, the body is very good. So we are a composite of body and soul. Second part of our Christian anthropology is that we also have intellect and will. On the way to school the other day with Mia, I was talking to her about like the Aristotelian levels of being. It was really fun because she was asking about the difference between humans and animals, and I was like, well, what do you think, Mia? Like, what do you think is the difference? But really, one of the things that we came down to was that we had the ability to know and contemplate God. We did not say it in those words, but to think. And then we also have the ability to choose virtue over vice, to choose God and his salvation, or to not. So we are created with freedom and the freedom to choose God or not choose God. And then the theology of the body really hit home the idea that another part of what makes us in the image of God is our maleness and our femaleness, which is obviously something that is a point of contention in modern culture. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So we can deduce from at least that scripture is the idea that there is something about our masculinity and something about our femininity that both equally but complementarily reflect the image of God. That there is just as much to learn about God from the masculine as there is to learn about God from the feminine. And then last, that the individual is most truly and fully themselves when in communion. If you remember from the creation story, aloneness was the first thing that God pronounced as being not good. This likeness reveals that man, who is the only creature on earth which God willed for itself, for his own sake, there was no utilitarian purpose to creating man, cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself, which you guys also hit the nail on the head with. We talked about community and relationship. So, basic components of Christian anthropology. What does it mean to be made in God's image? Today, as I was thinking about talking about this topic, when somebody asks you to talk about marriage, sex, and family from the Catholic Church's perspective, there's a lot of different angles you can take, and we're not going to hit all of it tonight. So just in case you thought we were going to hit all of it tonight, we're not. There's a lot that we're not going to cover. But we're going to get to some of the core basic fundamentals. And as I was praying and thinking about tonight and which angle to take tonight, the thing that kept coming back to me was this idea of our identity. Because identity is also something that we talk about a lot in culture right now. How do we identify ourselves? Do we identify ourselves as male or female? Do we identify ourselves as this or that? Do we identify ourselves by any number of identifications? Here's the thing about identity, though. Identity is not something that we construct, and it's not something that we do, and it is intrinsically, by definition, a relational thing. The only reason you need to have an identity is because you are identifying yourself in relationship to another person, or another thing. So in talking about identity, what I wanted to touch on first, have any of you guys ever heard of Dr. Bob Schuchts and the Healing the Whole Person approach of the St. John Paul II Healing Institute? It's sort of taking a beautiful, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. It's starting to grow in the church. But Dr. Bob Schuchts talks about our identities and how they begin. When we come into the world, our first identity is given to us. Hi friends, come on in, grab some snacks if you want. Our first identity is given to us as son or as daughter. And we have absolutely no control over that. We have no control over what home we're born into, what parents we are born to, what our sibling dynamic does or doesn't look like, if we're born into wealth or born into poverty, what neighborhood we're born into. No control, just thrust in the middle of the story. We are given as a gift, completely helpless and dependent on all of those aforementioned people that we didn't get to choose. But our first identity is received. We are either a son or we are a daughter. And it's only in relationship to our parents, to our father and our mother. If we have siblings, we move into the next layer of our identity, which is as brother or as sister. With brothers and sisters, we're learning a lot about mutual giving and sharing with each other. But the next layer of identity is husband and wife in some capacity. This is where we learn to give the gift of ourselves in a more profound way, where we enter into some sort of spousal relationship as husband or wife. And then the last one that we enter into is either father or mother, where we step into nurturing another new life. And that's the last layer of our identity. But it's really important for us to go through all of those. And sometimes this gets really messed up in our own families. Sometimes we're born into families where we don't get to be sons and daughters that are well attached to our parents. We don't get to be well taken care of. Instead, we're thrust into a situation where maybe you have to be a parent too soon. Or maybe there's some sort of abuse or something like that going on. Or maybe there's something happening where you're pushed into a role that you weren't ready for yet. And all of those things happen to each of us in their own way, but it doesn't change the fact that we have to come back to our identity, not as what we do, not as what we build, but as who we are in relationship with other people. Okay, I will mention this. This is from Pope Francis. So his document, Amoris Laetitia, is called The Joy of Love. And what he's basically talking about, I'm not going to read it, is how masculinity and femininity are not rigid categories. And if we go back to that slide, I think it's really important for us to remember that identity is son, daughter, brother, sister, husband, wife, father, mother, but that's not a descriptor of what that looks like. So if my identity is to be a daughter, sister, wife, mother, there are a lot of ways that that can look like. There's not a rigid category of femininity that says a wife has to look this way or a mother has to look this way. And it's really important for us to remember that our identity is different from the expression of that identity. And I think in our culture, especially as we see a rejection of a lot of different gender roles or stereotypes, we can honor that rejection because a lot of times what they're rejecting is a rigid stereotype of what it is to be masculine or what it is to be feminine. There are a great deal of expressions of masculinity and femininity where identity is still daughter, sister, wife, mother, but that can look a lot of different ways. And I can choose to reject somebody that says, no, your mother has to look like this. And I can say, it really doesn't. It doesn't change my identity, but my expression of it can look a little bit different. Trinitarily speaking, I don't know if you guys remember back in 2008, the Vatican talked about how there were some people, both in Catholic congregations and in Protestant denominations, that were baptizing in the name of Creator and Sanctifier and Redeemer. They were using different titles for Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and was declaring that those baptisms were invalid, that they didn't count, which I thought was interesting, because if we come back to identity and we look at how we're made in God's image, and if we're made in God's image of a communion of persons, we can look at the fact that God identifies himself as a communion of persons in relationship, and his identity is Father and Son and Holy Spirit. His identity is not what he does, even though he is the Creator, and he is the Redeemer, and he is the Sanctifier. That's not inaccurate, but his identity is as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so when we look at identity, we also mirror that same thing as well. That was just a picture of a baptism to remind me to talk about baptism. That was me. We'll see. The problem with the beautiful divine image that we play out in marriage is that we live in a fallen world. So we live in a place where, as much as we would love to live out this image of the perfect communion of love, it's really hard to do that. So the good news for marriage and sex and family is that we don't have to go it alone, that we're given the strength and the grace of Jesus, who stepped into our humanity and still has his humanity and has showed us the path forward and how to express our sexuality in a way that's healthy and holy, but also in a way that's going to make us happy. So I want to just look at each picture of identity. So we'll start with family, being sons and daughters, and being brothers and sisters. This was me when I was born. That's my mom. She's lovely and beautiful. When we are born, we are, like I said before, thrust into a family. My husband was telling me that he was listening to G.K. Chesterton's book, Heretics, on audiobook this past week, and he said there's a chapter that you should listen to on the family. And I was like, okay. And as I was listening to this chapter, there were a couple of sections that I really wanted to include, because I think it's important for us. This is what you were talking about a little bit earlier, John, the idea that we enter into, maybe we don't want certain people around our kids in our greater tribe, but when we're thrust into a family, we don't know what we're going to enter into. And G.K. Chesterton asserts that that's the whole point, that the adventure of the family is that we enter into a fallen world that has its own dysfunction. So he writes, the common defense of the family is that amid the stress and fickleness of life, it is peaceful, pleasant, and at one. But there is another defense of the family which is possible. And to me, evident, this defense is that the family is not peaceful and not pleasant and not at one. The supreme adventure is not falling in love. The supreme adventure is being born. There we do walk suddenly into a splendid and startling trap. There do we see something of which we have not dreamed before. Our father and mother do lie in wait for us and leap out on us like brigands from a bush. Our uncle is a surprise. Our aunt is, in the beautiful common expression, a bolt from the blue. When we step into the family by the act of being born, we do step into a world which is incalculable, in a world which has its own strange laws, into a world which could do without us, into a world that we have not made. In other words, when we step into the family, we step into a fairy tale. A man has control over many things in his life. He has control over enough things to be the hero of the novel, but if he had control over everything, there would be so much hero that there would be no novel. So it's okay that we're born into dysfunctional families, because God has given us a way to walk through the dysfunction and find healing and grace and find a grand adventure, because we all desire to be part of a grand adventure. St. Pope John Paul II said the same thing. There's no family that does not know how selfishness, discord, tension, and conflict violently attack and at times mortally wound its own communion. Hence there arise the many and varied forms of division in family life. But at the same time, every family is called by the God of peace to have the joyous and renewing experience of reconciliation. So the family is the first place that we're able to experience reconciliation in our domestic church, but also in the church at large. So the church as a whole, let's think specifically about the parish, and then the domestic church. The Catechism tells us that those two sacraments, the sacrament of holy orders and the sacrament of matrimony, the sacrament of marriage, are basically, they have equal footing. So they are the sacraments at the service of others, the sacrament at the service of communion. They both serve the human souls that are entrusted to them. They are both ordained in a sense, and they both are responsible for the transmission of life, biological or spiritual. So those two things are parallel together. So then we enter into this role of husbands and wives in marriage. If you've ever been married, if you've ever stood there and looked at another person and made impossible promises to them that you are promising for the rest of your life, that you have no idea what lies ahead, you have no idea how crappy it's going to be or how wonderful it's going to be or what obstacles you're going to face. There is no way that natural marriage works without the grace of the sacrament. I know for Michael and I, we got married in 2015, so we've been married for about 8 years now. The number of times that we have wanted to call it quits is a lot. There are a lot of times that we have wanted to call it quits. There are a lot of times that we have wanted to drop out, and I'm going to touch on that in a little bit more depth. Have any of you guys seen Harry Potter? Okay, this is neither a condemnation nor a condoning of Harry Potter. We will leave that for another Catholicism on Tap talk. But there's something in Harry Potter called the unbreakable vow, where you basically, once this vow is made, there is no possible way for it to be dissolved. It can't be dissolved. I've often, when I've taught on marriage, I've often compared marriage to the unbreakable vow, because when the components necessary for a sacramental marriage are in place, there is no way for that bond to be broken. It is indissoluble. In order to determine that, there are a couple of questions that get asked to a bride and a groom as they are preparing to make their vows to each other. They're asked, have you come here to enter into marriage without coercion, freely and wholeheartedly? Freedom is a huge component for the church when we enter into marriage, because we can't do that outside of our own free will. Are you prepared, as you follow the path of marriage, to love and honor each other for as long as you both shall live? And are you prepared to accept children lovingly from God and to bring them up according to the law of Christ and his church? If those three questions can be answered wholeheartedly, with freedom, with consent, with nothing coercing them otherwise, and we really mean those, then you enter into an indissoluble bond where there is nothing and no one that can break it. The church herself could never say, we're going to break that bond. So if you've ever been in an annulment process, or you've heard about annulments, the church is never looking to break a sacramental bond. But all they're trying to discern is, did that bond actually get formed? And if it did, there's nothing that we can do to break it. So sometimes if they declare that a marriage was null, it simply means that that bond wasn't there, that there was something wrong with a person's ability to enter into a sacramental marriage, to enter into that covenant together. Pius XI, he was writing a letter on Christian marriage, talked about how the sacrament of marriage is not just something that's added on to natural marriage, but is actually the reinstating of the original plan for marriage. That in order for us as human persons to enter into this covenant, where we basically become family and we can never part, that there has to be some sort of a special strength given to them. That's what Christ gave to us by reinstating the sacrament of marriage, so that what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. So it wasn't that the sacrament was added on top of that, but rather when we elevated marriage to the level of a sacrament, it was God saying this was the original plan, and now we're making it possible for you by the sacrament of matrimony, by the sacrament of your baptism, for you to actually walk through this sacrament, walk through this vocation together. So the sacrament is what makes marriage possible. Without the grace that flows from the sacrament of matrimony, even natural marriage was so hard that Moses was compelled to make exceptions. It is the sacrament that makes marriage possible, both personally and as a foundational social institution. It is the sacrament, therefore, that makes sustainable human societies possible. And so while a couple who enters into a natural marriage without the benefits of the sacrament, in most cases contracts a true marriage with all the duties that are implied, it is like a football team without a coach. So it is legitimate, but still missing the element that provides the order and support necessary for success. So the sacramental grace is what gives us the ability to walk through marriage together. Marriage is often called a school of love, and like I said before, there's a lot of times that you want to drop out of the school of love, and you kind of want to know when the add-drop period is. You're like, is it too late for me to drop out of this? Like, do I have to keep being part of the school? I was recently taking managerial accounting, and I was not ready for that. I am not an accountant by any means. So I dropped that class. I haven't cried doing homework since the 9th grade, and I cried doing homework in accounting class. But marriage is one of those classes that you don't get to drop. And I was telling Michael as I was preparing for tonight, I was like, I'm going to be honest, like, I'm sure there were more times that you wanted to drop than that I wanted to drop. There were so many times where after the same stupid argument, or after the same frustration, or after the same whatever it was, where you're stuck with each other, and all of the yuck comes to the surface all of the time. And it's not fun. Like, it's really not fun. It's not fun. And I think if we go into marriage thinking like this is going to be super fun, it can be. There's beautiful elements of fun in marriage and of joy in marriage. But the reality is that when we enter into marriage, or just like when a priest enters into ordination with the sacrament of holy orders, he's not entering into fun. He's entering into a sacrament, a vocation at the service of others. And that sanctity for himself, just like the sanctity for the spouses, comes from walking out the sacrament together. The whole point is that it's supposed to be hard. That because we are fallen, because as human beings we have the stain of sin, and because we're very selfish people, and because there's a lot of vice in my own soul that has to get worked out, and God is really gracious and he doesn't make me do it all at once, and he's given me a spouse to do it over the course of hopefully a long time, so we can continue to like work on all the gunk that's in my own heart. But our relationship together is like sandpaper, where as you are rubbing up against each other, it's annoying and it sucks sometimes, but it's also what sanctifies you, and it's what makes you a virtuous person if you are willing to let it make you a virtuous person. And so if our framework of marriage is that we're going into a school that we cannot ever drop, and that is really hard, but we will also learn from the school how to be saints, with that mindset and with the grace of the sacrament, we can do it. I think with any other mindset, I don't know how you do it, because there were plenty of times that I didn't want to do it. But the reason that we are standing here still married and still able to talk with any sense of optimism about the sacrament of marriage is because it's been hard, but because the grace of the sacrament and the grace of our baptism is what makes it possible for us to do that and mirror this image of the divine, which is a big pair of shoes to fill. So the last piece, I'm going to say this for the end because I think I'm already very, very close to being out of time, is sexuality, the one that we probably have the most questions about, where we become fathers and we become mothers. I've heard a lot of people say that you should have a license to be a parent, like they should do more before you're allowed to have kids. And I agree, but I also come back and I'm like, well, the church is trying, but then you get all miffed about all of the requirements to get married. And I'm like, the whole point is that the preparation for marriage is an understanding of the fact that the institution of marriage, the sacrament of matrimony, which by the way means to make a mother of. Did you know that? The sacrament of matrimony means to make a mother of. It is like implied in the very name that there's going to be babies at some point in this institution. The whole point of marriage preparation is that you understand that this institution is going to have little human beings who have no prefrontal cortex, who are going to test you in every possible way, and we want you to be ready for that. There's a lot to be ready for. We're trying to give you a license so that you're ready for that. And even then you're still not ready for it, but at least you had a little bit of like, okay, I was prepared. This is from a book called The First Society by Scott Hahn, where he's talking about marriage as the first society, not the individual, but the family as the first society. And he goes on about the nuclear and triangle family, like John was mentioning as well. But he talks about how sex is simultaneously one of the most intensely private and public actions we can perform. Because we've been trained to think of procreation as a bonus that we can add on to sex, like we're upgrading to first class, rather than being inherently part of human sexuality, the modern view is that sex is inherently sterile, and it only becomes procreated by accident or by the choice of the participants. So we talk about contraception failure rates, unplanned pregnancies, sterility as we assume our natural state, while fertility is a choice or a mistake. But the church has taught from the very beginning that just as human beings are made for something outside of ourselves, communion with God, sex is also made for something outside of its own enjoyment, namely participation with God in the creation of new persons. This is not to say that sex is only for procreation, but that its primary end is procreation. It's therefore deeply intimate and ordered towards something, and often someone, we call them Mia and Leo, outside of itself. He also writes there is virtually nothing we do exteriorly in the order of nature that makes us more like God than sex. To fully give of ourselves in a self-donating way, to fully receive someone else in a way that holds nothing back and doesn't say, I'm not going to receive something from you, and is intrinsically life-giving and life-generating. Sexuality is the place I think that we are the most wounded, especially in this particular culture, and it's the place where we're the most offended by the church's teachings. I wanted to bring in this picture because someone taught me once, actually back before I was a Catholic, that the word for sin that's used in scripture is a Greek word. It's an archery term that basically means to miss the mark. So when we think about God's best for sexuality, we think about like what is the bullseye, is the nuptial meaning of the body, this selfless giving of ourselves to the other person and completely receiving them. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, husband, wife, child, like there's this beautiful communion of love. That's the bullseye. But then there are all of these ways that we miss the mark from that bullseye, especially when it comes to areas of our sexuality. These are not necessarily all in the same place on the target. It's just because the target was different colors and the black didn't show up on them. But there are a lot of different ways that we can sin against marriage. But sin isn't necessarily something that we do. It's something that we don't do. It's choosing something that was good or okay or gratifying, but it wasn't God's best. And I have children, and sometimes they don't want the best. Sometimes they don't want it. They want fruit snacks. Like, fruit snacks are good. Like, we could eat fruit snacks all day long in our house. But God's best for us is a difficult calling. He calls us to the school of love, and he calls us to look like himself. And there are a lot of different ways that we miss the mark when it comes to our sexuality. And it's not God saying, you're an awful person because you did that. He understands that a lot of us come from our woundedness. But rather that I have something better for you. There's something better for you in the center of the bullseye, and I'm going to keep helping you. And we're going to keep going to confession, and we're going to keep engaging in the sacrament of marriage, and we're going to keep coming back to our baptismal promises, and we're going to keep striving and keep studying and keep working and embracing and receiving more of God's grace, so that by the end of our lives we can hit the bullseye, especially when it comes to us living out our marriage and our sexuality in a way that is divine. The cross is often been called the marriage bed of the Lamb, where we see the perfect bridegroom pouring himself out, and us as the church receiving the gift of his body. When we go to communion and receive the Eucharist, we're receiving the body of Christ. If we go to confession beforehand, it's the same reason you might take a shower before you have sex with your spouse. Because we want to present ourselves in a way that is beautiful and receptive and attractive to this other person. And so the Lord pours himself out to us as the bridegroom. And we, as the church, which is always feminine, is the bride. Because this whole thing is going to end in a wedding. Because it always ends in a wedding. I wanted to end, as we get to the end, to talk a little bit about my own personal experience with this particular topic. So, we look so beautiful and happy, and motherhood looks like, I think motherhood looks good on me. I never thought that I would have children. And the church's teachings on being open to life, the church's teachings on how procreation needed to be part of entering into marriage, that was very, very, very hard for me. When we were sitting around the fire with, it was my husband, not husband at the time, and Josh and Father Sikowski, and we're learning about these teachings, and I think it was Josh who was teaching us, like, yeah, like every act of sexual intimacy has to be open to life. It has to be open to the possibility of having a baby. Doesn't mean you have to have a baby, just have to be open to the possibility of having a baby. And I did not like that. I thought you should be able to get married and not have to have kids. Like, why was that something that the church taught? Didn't like it at all. I realized, as people like Father Sikowski and other people came alongside me, that there was a lot more to why I didn't want that than I thought. That it wasn't me reeling against motherhood, but it was me reeling against a lot of what I had seen as motherhood, not from my own mom growing up, but a lot of the environment that we were in. We were in a very fundamentalist homeschool community, and there was a lot of the only way for you to be a woman is for you to have babies and stay at home, and you can never go to college, and you can never speak, and you kind of just have to stay there and teach the children, and that's all. And I, being a firstborn, list-loving, very opinionated woman, was like, that's crap. No, you're not. I'm not interested in that. And so I realized that a lot of my rejection of motherhood was fear. And it was an honoring of something that I also was not true. And had a lot of people who were willing to sit with me and hear all of the yuck that came out of my own heart in the process of being willing to be open. And even when we were pregnant with Mia, it happened a lot faster than I thought. Like, we were trying and open, but I was really surprised at how fast it took. And I had a lot of anger, and I was very, it took a long time for me to work through those things. And that is to say nothing about my love for motherhood and my love for my daughter. But that was honestly my story. And when she's old enough, I will share parts of that with her, because I want her to understand that it's okay to feel those things. And it's okay to be mad. And it's okay that some of the church's teachings hit a nerve, and it hurts, and it's offensive, and you don't like it, and you don't understand why the church teaches that. But through the grace of the sacraments, St. Pope John Paul II was the same person who said it's okay for things to take time. He talked about the law of gradualness, which is not that the law changes, because the truth is always just right here. It's just as hard, and it never changes, and it never moves. But it's okay if it takes time for us to come to terms with that. It's okay if it takes a while for us to be willing to even consider changing something. Like, if we hear that this is wrong, that okay, we can't use contraception, or like same-sex attraction. Okay, like I struggle with this. The church teaches like I can't enter into a same-sex marriage. Okay, I'm really mad about that. There's a lot to dig into there, and it is okay to sit with all of those feelings, because that is part of growth and part of conversion. And as Christians, as Catholics, it's really important, I think, for us to be able to walk with other people when they bring us all of their yuck. Because if people had said to me, oh, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but like, this is the teaching, suck it up, buttercup, I would have been like, okay, I'm out. I'm not going to walk into the church. I'm not going to walk into motherhood. I'm just going to stay right back here where I'm comfortable. But thankfully, I had people around me who were okay letting me be angry, okay letting me be mad, and now I get to stand here as a stay-at-home mom and tell you how much I love being a mom. Like, life is ironic, so stuff can change, stuff can happen. That's sort of the whole point of following after Jesus, in being Christian. So I put together this list, Because when it comes to sexuality, and I know we're not going to get into a deep dive of all of these specific issues, there are a lot of things that can be the wound for us that might be the thing underneath the sin. Whatever sin of sexuality that we commit, whatever way we're missing the mark, usually there's something underneath that. So again, in strained relationship with parents or children, maybe you are single and you're longing to be married. And you're like, Lord, I would really love to enter into this like freely and totally and faithfully and fruitfully, what the heck? Maybe you're struggling with infertility and you're longing to have children and you don't understand why the Lord won't give you children. Maybe you have children and you don't understand why the Lord gives you so many. Like seriously, we can just slow it down. Maybe it's the death of a spouse, or maybe it's sexual addiction, or again, hyperfertility, where you have a lot of children even if you're trying not to. Chronic or mental illness, loss of emotional intimacy in your marriage, infidelity, sexual abuse, the death of a child, losing a child to miscarriage or to stillbirth, divorce, spousal abandonment, sincere same-sex attraction that you don't know what to do with, and you don't understand why this is your story, gender confusion, suffering in that area, clerical sexual abuse, something else. There's a lot of wounds. And the church is not here to throw the book of the law at us. The church is here to heal us. Jesus came to heal us. Mary consoles Eve by saying, I did what you couldn't do, but that's not to say I'm better than you. That's me saying, like, I'm gonna help you. Mary and Jesus are here to help us walk through that wound. So it's easy to look at the statistics about marriage and about culture and freak out. And I would just say, we don't need to freak out. The point is not that we need to look out there and fix what's going on out there. That's not our calling. Maybe in a particular way we're supposed to step into that. We're not supposed to look at that and freak out. Be not afraid. But instead, I would propose, when it comes to marriage and family and sexuality, that what if, in our Christian communities, we look like the communities in the Acts 2 community, where all who believed were together and they had all things in common. What if, John, we created a village as a Christian community? Because a lot of people don't have a tribe. A lot of moms, a lot of dads, they don't have a village. They don't have a tribe. They don't have people who are supporting them. They are alone in this nuclear family, and they are isolated, and they are hurting. But what if they had all things in common? What if they sold their possessions and goods and distributed them to all as any had need? What if people looked at our communities and they noticed they don't need anything? The people in that Christian community have everything that they need. Nobody's poor there. Nobody is lonely there. Nobody struggles alone there. Nobody doesn't have the material goods that they need. Nobody doesn't have the emotional goods that they need. Nobody doesn't have the support that they need. Look at that community. Could you imagine if just our little Christian communities that we already see little sparks of, I see that in our Christian communities. What if as a whole, that was us? That was us. Because at the end of the day, marriage and sexuality and family are destroyed not by people who are same-sex attracted, or not by people who are abortion doctors or anything like that, but by the enemy, because marriage, sexuality, and family is a picture of God. And Satan has nothing more that he would like to do than mar the face of God. So if he can attack our marriages, if he can attack our sexuality, he can attack our families, well, then he wins. But if he doesn't attack our marriages and sexuality and families, and we're able to still live out those things by the grace of God, by the grace of the sacraments, then we show people the image of God who wants to love them and who wants to heal them. So I present to you in closing. This is just my own personal list. You don't have to do them. But these are 18 ways, practical ways, because I'm a practical person, to promote the sanctity of marriage and family. These may seem insignificant, but these will actually change the world. Because if you look out at the world, you're like, oh my gosh, like what do we do about the sanctity of marriage? Nothing, don't do it. Don't worry about that right now. Just worry about this right now. Okay, number 1, offer to provide childcare, free childcare of any kind to any person with children under the age of 18. Like the only reason that we can be here is because down in the basement there is free childcare for my children who are running around downstairs right now with their friends, and they love being here. If you have time to give, whether it's here or to a family with any children, just can I watch your children? Please. Do you need a nap? Do you need a cup of coffee? Do you need to go to an appointment? I will watch your babies. Free childcare first. Very, very, very important one. Sit in the middle of the pew and leave the aisles open. I don't know why everybody likes to just, I get it, you sit on the end seats, but when you're the family and you're dragging your kids to mass and you're late, it sucks and everybody's staring at you and everybody's sitting on the ends and you have to be like, can I please, just hold on, I'm just gonna crawl over you. My children, I'm so sorry. Just give them the gift of an end seat that nobody took 5 minutes. Oh my gosh, you guys, that would change the whole stinking world right there. All right, check in on a married couple and ask about their needs. Listen, give them whatever you can. If they need money, if they need time, if they need wine, I don't know, whatever they need. Check in on a mom and ask about her needs. Then listen and give her whatever you can. Check in on a dad and ask about his needs. Sincerely listen. Give him whatever you can. You may see a pattern here in these next few. Check in on a widow or a widower and listen. Ask about their needs. Give them whatever you can. Maybe that's just your time. Maybe that's just the fact that you noticed that they were there and they don't have anybody to talk to. Check in on a single person or an empty nester. Ask about their needs. Listen. Give them whatever you can. Check in on a priest. Ask about their needs. Listen. Give them whatever you can. Offer to buy a family their kids' winter clothes or boots in the next size up, because sometimes that's really expensive and you can't afford it. Drop off a meal or a grocery gift card or wine to a family just because. They don't have to have just had a baby. Like you just, hey, you had a baby like 5 years ago. Here's a meal. Awesome. Okay. Are you just tired of cooking? I think there should be a ministry that's just, you're tired of cooking, here's a meal. Invite someone over to your house. Anyone. Feed them, talk with them, make them feel at home in your home. Smile and give verbal encouragement to a family whose kid is losing their mind at Mass. Don't be the person who doesn't say anything. Like, just say something. So glad you're here. That's it. So glad you're here. It's great that you're here. Pray for and perhaps serve someone who has the thing you deeply desire but you don't have. If you are single and you would love to be married, intentionally pray for and serve a married person. That is like good penance. Oh, it's hard, but good. Help someone unemployed to find a job with a just wage. That's a significant issue right now for a lot of families who are struggling to make ends meet. Consider becoming an adoptive or foster parent in your own city. You don't even have to do it. Just consider it. Just think about it. Is the Lord asking you to consider that? Find the Van Hamerts an affordable minivan. Take something you are going to sell and give it to a person who needs it instead. Consider that the Christians shared all that they had. Everything was in common. Do you have something that you don't need that maybe someone else needs? Give it to them. Don't sell, just give it to them. Like ask, do you need anything? Here, I have this, you can have this. Invite a single, divorced, or widowed person or parent to your house for Thanksgiving because they might not have anywhere to go. Living out the sanctity of marriage and family is not a big esoteric theological thing. It is in the mundane, everyday way that we live with and accompany the people who are around us. So with that, if you have any other ideas, feel free to add them. I am so over time. I'm so sorry. But if you have time for questions, answer questions. Otherwise, I'm done. I'm going to end right there.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Appreciate that. Just so that our childcare volunteers come back next time, how about if you have any questions, would you be just kind of standing near the front?
I'll
perhaps?
stick around.
Yeah, we can form a long sort of communion-style line.
Sure.
If you want to go up and chat with Jacqueline. Otherwise, thank you very much, everybody, for coming out. Our speaker next month, December 4th, is another lady, actually, a certain Molly Bushman, president of Max, and she's going to be talking about the universal call to holiness and prayer. We're going to have a practicum with that and offer some intercessory prayer. So thank you again, Jacqueline, and feel free to hit her up, grab some goodies on your way out, and thanks for coming out, everybody. God bless.